All right, everybody, welcome to Hardpoints, the podcast about energy security and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each week, we unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neil, how you doing?
Doing great. Just got back from Australia. I was in Sydney for a week. So got to drink my favorite beer of all time, which is Victoria Bitter. And if I can just share the glow for a minute, some songs take you back to like a time and a place. That beer, I was 21 when I was in Australia. So I turned 21 when I was there. And that beer just has that same, like, it takes me back to that time and place. So it was pretty fantastic.
Well, that's great. I had Australia's a lot of fun. When I was in the Navy, I did a series of port calls there. I also got to do the maybe the best deal of all time, as far as I can tell. So the U.S. Specifically Boeing was trying to sell the Super Hornet to the Royal Australian Air Force. And so Boeing decided that they needed to have some Super Hornets at the largest air show in Australia, the Geelong, which is just outside of. And so they asked, the nearest Super Hornets were in Japan at my squadron. And so they asked us to fly these jets down, paid for commercial air tankers in order to drag the jets. And we flew all the way down to Melbourne, Geelong specifically, parked the jets, signed them over to Boeing. Weren't even allowed to fly them because Boeing leased them back from the US government. And so we got a 2.5 week paid vacation effectively to Victoria, to Melbourne. And so Victoria Bitter, yeah. So like Melbourne's super cool town. There was all these things around, like they had the World Swimming Championships in town while we were there. There was also an F1 race. I'd never been to one of those. So we go to this, F1 race, and I don't know anything about when it comes to that racing, but we're just like, yeah, we'll go cheer for this. And we saw these one guys that were in front of us that were cheering for this one driver, and so we started cheering for him. And they at first thought we were making fun of them, you know what I mean? And then we were like, oh, let's go get them some beers. And so we went and we bought a bunch of VB, brought over, and they drank the Victoria Bitter. Then they decided that they were going to go buy us beers. And so we went back and forth like this a couple of times, drinking a lot of VB in the hot sun. And by the end of the towards the end of the race, we went to go buy beers, came back. In the interim, the driver had crashed, and so these guys were all like upset and they left. And so we came back and we had like arms full of beers because there was more of them than there were us, and we were like, well, we can't leave them now. So so I had a very close and personal experience with the Victoria Bitter beer.
Solid choice.
Yeah,
solid.
Felt a little rough around the edges the next day, but yeah, that's where it takes me back when I hear VB.
That sounds like an amazing day. And also we should note for our listeners that yes, service is, hard work and sacrifice, but also a boondoggle or two. So don't feel too bad for us at all times.
Yeah, it was, that was a really good deal. That was kind of the end of the most exciting and adventurous year of my life. So that was just like the cherry on top.
Right on. That sounds awesome.
You doing anything this weekend, man?
Well, it looks like we're going to go to my uncle's 102nd birthday. I say looks like because it's been a hard time getting all the schedules around my kids' baseball and whatever. But as of today, we're going to make the trip out. He's in Chicago, so I don't get to see him that much. And it's pretty amazing. We celebrated his 90th, and we're excited about that. And here he is now 102 almost, and still going. So
it's a very motivational birthday. My squadron when I was flying was VFA 102. So
okay.
Tell them congratulations from the Diamondbacks of the world class Diamondbacks.
Right on. I will. Yeah, he's an old World War II vet. He was in bombers, so he did his missions as a bombardier in B-29s over Europe. So he's still got some crazy stories about that. But yeah, really good guy. He came back from the war and he bought and sold steel for 40 years in the private sector. And, he now still bemoans how we don't make steel in America anymore. I'm sure I'll hear about that a little bit over the weekend.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, as a centenarian, the guy's been retired almost as long as he was working. Like that's
True.
yeah.
That's
Hopefully,
true.
has his health been pretty good? I mean, clearly good enough to live to 102. Has he been able to
Good
enjoy it?
enough. Yeah, he played golf until he was early 90s, which is, I mean, played is, a relative term, and he was on the course, and, he generally would, get through the game or get through the course, but not, not driving the ball 300 yards. He's slowed down now, right? He doesn't leave the house that much, but he does, and he's going to make the trip up. For example, the party's up in Wisconsin. He's going to get up and get out of the house and go do that too. So, yeah, he's chugging along.
I mean, I wonder. You kind of look back and on his life, and you wonder if the young man that was dodging flak over Europe, like recognized how many sunsets he was risking after that.
Totally.
Like just like an incredible life lived. Thankfully, was not taken from him over Europe, but just like there was 80 years of his life to go. He was willing to give
Yeah.
that all up in the cause of freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that reminds me, I heard this stat recently that I found really interesting, which is it is true that the average life expectancy for an American male is 78, something like that. But also true that if you live to be 50, your life expectancy is more like 88 or something, way higher. Because, most people, if they're going to die before they're 78, die when they're like 20 or whatever. And then in addition to that, you can get a couple extra bonus points if you make enough money or if you live in a certain part of the country, whatever. So, most people think the average life expectancy is 78. That's my number. But in reality, there are these other factors that, change your stats, depending on if you've lived to be 50, I have, and if you live in certain parts of the world, whatever. So anyway, look it up. Maybe your life expectancy is greater than 78.
Yeah, every year you live, your life expectancy goes up just a little bit longer just because you made it through that year.
Yeah.
One of those bonus points you get is if your man is getting married.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Funnily enough, it doesn't go the other way. Women's life expectancy is unaffected by their marital status. And I like to tease my wife and my children that it's a fair trade for how many times I have to wait around for them.
So true. So
yeah,
true.
my kids are the slowest eaters, and so like I've calculated it out. Like I lose like several months of my life waiting for them to finish their dinner and their breakfast, over the 18 years that they're going to be under my roof. So
I relate to that a lot. Get in the car. Come on, just get in the car.
so, God balanced it out for us a little bit. We got married, but so we get to stop and smell the roses and or yell at the kids. So, all right, man. Let's do some news. All right, everybody, welcome back to the news you need, here to guide you through today's headlines with just the right amount of eye rolling. So let's dive in. First story up today is Elon Musk has said bye, Felicia, to Doge, and is heading back to Tesla, maybe with a side of drugs. After a whirlwind 130-day gig running the Department of Government Efficiency, lovingly nicknamed Doge, Elon Musk has officially clocked out on May 30th, 2025, and is heading back to Tesla headquarters. You may recall that he's bragged about finding about $2 trillion in federal waste, which of course was later downgraded to a mere $150 billion, which prompted both equal parts of applause from one side of the political spectrum and a lot of face palming from everybody else. Because government spending has actually increased since the Trump administration has come in. Anyways, there's more though. New York Times has done a deep dive to expose his off-hours hobbies, which is daily ketamine binges, mixed with ecstasy, magic mushrooms, and even Adderall. So intense it allegedly gave him ketamine-induced bladder damage, according to some of the reporting. Apparently, while juggling rocket launches and political power plays, Musk was also on a tour of the human pharmacy. One insider told the Times they found a box of about 20 different pills in his locker because, well, why not? Investors are now breathing a collective sigh of relief that Musk is fully recommitted to Tesla and SpaceX. Reporting is indicating that they've sent him a letter demanding that he spend at least 40 hours a week on the EV automaker or risk losing his not as valuable as they once were stock options. There is no word yet on whether that 40-hour week demands rehab. The second article that we're talking about here today is about how Democrats are splurging on influencers to outmeme the Republicans. Traumatized by the 2024 Broscape podcast wave, Democrats have decided that what really fixes messaging is a bunch of cold hard cash to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars to bankroll a new generation of left-leaning influencers. According to the New York Times, also, strategists are launching funds like the Achieve Narrative Dominance and Project Bullhorn, each aiming with around $40 million in seed money. Their mission is to clone a Mano podcast that can match Joe Rogan's grip on young male voters. Critics, of course, snicker that you can't buy cultural resonance, though they'd probably take that the $40 million and invest it in pizza for swing state voters or something. The third thing that we have to talk about here today is about rogue radio gear hidden in solar inverters. Near and dear, I'm sure, to Neil's heart there in infrastructure news, U.S. officials stumbled upon some unwelcome features in certain Chinese-made solar inverters, undocumented cellular radios, and other comms modules tucked inside the hardware. The sneaky additions aren't in the official bill of materials, meaning foreign agents could quietly flip a software switch and potentially fry your local grid or just collapse it when in times of need. It does get better. Some similar hidden gizmos have popped up in batteries and heat pumps from multiple Chinese suppliers over the past 9 months. Since Chinese companies are legally bound to cooperate with their government's intelligence apparatus systems, security experts warn this could be a ticking time bomb for blackout-happy hackers. Congress is belatedly drafting bills like the Decoupling from Foreign Adversarial Battery Dependence Act to keep these devices off U.S. soil, and the Department of Energy is fast-tracking, quote, trusted, end quote, domestic gear. But with renewables booming, every new panel may come with a side of espionage. Speaking of climate, our final story today is about an alpine apocalypse associated with a Swiss village. Tragedy struck in the Swiss Alps early on May 28th, 2025. A massive chunk of the Birch Glacier gave way, sending millions of cubic meters of ice, mud, and rock cascading down on the village of Blatten. Thanks to a last-minute evacuation ordered about 10 days earlier after a bunch of ominous rockfalls, most residents escaped. One person is still unaccounted for. The pictures are quite horrific. Swiss engineers are now racing to tame a newly formed ice-dammed lake that threatens downstream flooding. Glaciologists point to warming-driven permafrost melt as the culprit. An alpine reminder that our planet's thermostat is broken, and there are some very real physical consequences associated with not dealing with it. That's your 5-minute whirlwind of the absurd, the alarming, and sometimes the downright tragic. Thanks again for the news you need. Until next time, stay skeptical, safe, and maybe lay off the ketamine. I don't know. What do you think, Neil?
I think we're all pretty happy to see Elon go. I mean, I think nobody more than Elon himself. I think you could see in the most recent interviews that he's kind of beat down. And I mean, I kind of feel for the guy. I know it makes me feel like he actually was genuine. I thought for a while that there was some validity to the idea that he was just doing what he was doing to influence his private sector businesses, right? He went after the regulators that were slowing him down on SpaceX. And, and while he did that, I don't know. I just don't think he's a good enough actor to really hide what's going on. And if you look at some of his recent interviews, he really does just look beat down. So I sort of buy the argument that he tried and it didn't go quite the way he wanted. He got beat up, blamed for a lot of stuff, some of which was his fault, some of which wasn't. His brands took a huge hit. I think the sad part is that he's basically not done any good. They were going to go save trillions of dollars. If you take a very generous view, maybe he's going to save 1% for the budget. But even that's there's a lot of skepticism around that. I mean, it's probably most of what he's done is going to get reversed or is going to be so inefficient that he's not going to have done any good. So I don't know. I mean, and the drugs thing just baffles me. I don't know if it's true or not. You look at some of his behavior, maybe it explains some of it, but I can't function at all when I've had a couple of drinks. So having these really, really hardcore drugs is sort of beyond my capability of understanding.
He's a very polarizing figure, right? And he's polarizing for some very valid reasons. But in that polarization, you have to kind of recognize a little bit about who he is as a person. And he is a pretty incredible person. He's taken a couple of companies and driven them. Both Tesla and SpaceX are incredible companies. Overvalued in the case of Tesla, you know, for a lot of reasons, that we could get into. Uh, but nonetheless, like starting a new car company in the United States is practically impossible. He did it. And so you have to give a lot of credit. And so there's some things that I think that helped him with his success moving, into that. It was just like having the ego to believe that he could push through and break through these barriers to a certain extent and bring companies into the mainstream, having the right risk tolerance, understanding how this fits into kind of like product adoption curves in the form of EVs and the kind of riding that the right direction. There's some brilliance in that. And I think it should be stated. But that brilliance can turn into hubris. And that's, I think, what happened with Doge is he had kind of a simpleton's view of how the government works and thought that if he came in and made drastic sort of things like that, it would work. And he frankly didn't know the first goddamn thing. And so he ended up trashing a lot of his reputation in an absolute fool's errand. The improving government efficiency, you and I have talked about it before, all on board, right? We should want tax dollars to go as effectively as they can. But bluntly, if you're not willing to go after the DoD, like you're not even really that all serious about it to begin with.
Yeah.
And he just
he didn't go after the big programs, right? He went after the low hanging fruit. Honestly, the USAID one still crushes me because I'm a believer in the soft power. And this is what we've fought for, you and I and the rest of the service members over the last 50 years, to build a system where America has tremendous influence all around the world. Part of that is soft power, which has gotten through USAID. By the way, USAID is a name for some of the covert crap that we do all over the world. So, he didn't go after the big programs that are really the problem. Man, it just looks like it's been all for naught. And I agree with you. He is the entrepreneur of our time. There's so much to admire about what he's done. But his reputation has been severely damaged. We'll see over the long term whether it recovers. But right now it's not looking too good.
Yeah, I mean, it's also worth saying that like Doge was not what caused this, right? Like Doge was the end state of it. And for me, it's the drugs. Like he's been openly discussed about using drugs. He did it on the Joe Rogan podcast, for example. And so like he still has a security clearance. Like there's a whole lot of things where the rules don't seem to apply to him because he's wealthy and he's connected. The problems that are with Tesla are not actually, in my opinion, they're not because of Doge. The problems with Tesla are because of the Cybertruck, which is that he decided that instead of building what he'd been promising, which was an electric car for every American, like something that the affordable electric car for everybody, he decided to go the other direction on the product adoption curve and build something like this, just this like masculine jerk off, like weirdo fantasy, you know? And it's just a weird truck, right? Like he decided, you know what? I've built the first American new car brand in a long time. I'm gonna, you know what? I want to be the guy that does the DeLorean now. And you're like, what? Like
it's memorable. You give him that. But no, the reputation damage though. I think if you look at Tesla sales in Europe and California, where his big markets are, that they're way down. That's the long term effect that may, in fact, because as you say, the Tesla stock is inflated. It's inflated in the sense that people are looking at the future, and therefore it doesn't actually trade at a fair price. It trades at a sort of prospective price because people are pricing in all this growth in the future, and if that growth trajectory is vastly different, things for that company could be vastly different in the future. But yes, I also agree that the Cybertruck is wacky looking.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for the guy. He's, he'll cry himself to sleep, on a bed of $1 million, right? But
Right. He'll be fine. He'll be fine.
yeah, exactly. Um, how about we move on to what we're talking about as far as Democrats getting into the influence, or trying to at least get into the podcast influencer game.
Yeah, it's a little weird, I guess. There's a lot of crap out there on the right. I think the far right podcasters, the Tate brothers and Tucker Carlson. I mean, there's just a lot of crap out there. So I get the idea that the Democrats want a counterbalance to that. I don't know. In transparency, what you and I are doing is here on Hardpoints is a part of an effort to just bring balance to the galaxy, right? I mean, it's not. Sorry, I'm a Star Wars fan. That was a Star.
I think everybody got the nerd
Wars
alert there.
Okay, good. Look, we're pretty centrist guys, and I think that the idea is that we don't want folks on the far right or the far left to dominate. The hope is that we can help folks identify a reality that is close to a factual, accurate reality as possible. So I guess I would just say I understand why they're doing it. It's probably going to end up being sort of a far left version of what's on the far right.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as very Democrat to do the navel gazing as far as like, should we do this or should we not, or what's this all about? And like, because meanwhile, for 20 years, the Koch brothers dumped a ton of money into the far right ecosystem, right? And like they had a viewpoint that they wanted to get out there. They supported the people that spoke that, and that's what it turned into. So we'll see how that goes. It reminds me of the. I'm trying to remember the adage. It's something along the lines of like culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is a business maxim, which is the idea of like a good business culture can really, propel a business forward. And it's the same sort of thing here, which is for me, when I look at this, are Democrats speaking to men a little bit more and about like the needs of men? And like, if that's what they're doing, I'm down for it. Not that men need to be prioritized over women per se, but it's like for a long time I think it felt like you had to potentially apologize for being a man if you were a Democrat a little bit, or at least that was the perception from a lot of men. And so if we're a party that just speaks of inclusivity, and I consider myself a little bit left of center, should also be trying to include about like some of the problems that are facing men too. So I think that would be great, and I think it could change the culture of the party there a little bit.
Well, if it changes the culture of the party a bit, then that's a positive thing. Did that?
Yeah, a little less top down, a little less navel gazy. Hopefully, is what that does. Ironically, it's a very top down thing, though, right? So we'll see how this all goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of we were one of the news stories was around the comms and solar inverters associated with this and renewable power. Like I know this has got to be like near and dear to your heart, Neil.
Oh my gosh, it scares the crap out of me. I mean, look, we've already been hacked. AT&T's been hacked deeply. If you're an AT&T user, you probably read about this. It is no secret to those of us that are really paying attention to this that China is engaged in what one might call phase 0 operations. This is prepping the battlefield for a coming war. This is another example of it. They're going to keep trying to do it on all fronts. Look, we were smart enough to ban Huawei from the comms infrastructure. We need to recognize that our power infrastructure is critical infrastructure and needs to be protected. If we ever went to war with China, one of the first things they would do is take down our grid. And this is part of how they would do it. This looks like benign comms equipment, which, inverters necessarily have to have a layer of smarts in them, which is why we're probably moving to a point where inverters with smarts in them can't touch our grid. I don't know how else we're going to solve this other than really treating each of these uh, pieces of hardware and software as access to our national security.
Yeah. So towards the end of my time in active duty, I went to targeting school, which is so targeting school is, yeah, how do you put a bomb on a target and make the thing blow up, etc. But in a bigger picture, like what you're doing with targeting is about like how do you achieve the effect that you want, um, which is not always about bombs. So, for example, it could be about going after certain key nodes of infrastructure, right? And if the idea is that you don't want to know somebody is like if you're executing an attack and you don't want them to know about it, you can go after their radar stations and maybe they have 50 of them, or maybe you can just drop the grid at a certain transformer station. And if you can drop that grid with one thing and black out all their radars because of loss of redundancy, like you've achieved a much more massive effect associated with that. And in that, we talked a little bit about the cyber, and this is like over a decade ago now. Like this was in 2012 that I was going through targeting school. And so if we were talking about it then, like the state of war has only advanced since then. And this is an example of it. Like this is the Chinese could achieve a war level effect without having to drop a bomb. And like that's really important. And like we've talked a little bit, you and I, Neil, about like how some of the stuff you're doing at Heirloom is actually is to help build resiliency for domestic bases, for example, that are
Yep.
reliant upon the grid.
Yeah. Military bases have decided, and that's probably not the technical approach to it. The Department of Defense has decided they need to microgrid all of their bases because if the civilian grid goes down, they need to have energy power for at least their critical infrastructure. Each base is slightly different, so there's no one size fits all here. But yeah, I think this is part and parcel to that, and that means at least on military bases, we need to keep Chinese shit out of our stuff. Like, holy crap! I don't know. This scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, I think about like I'm a climate guy. I've got solar panels on my roof. They've got micro inverters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where those micro inverters came from. I know the panels are American made,
Mm-hmm.
but which was a little bit of a rare thing. But I don't know where the microinverters came from. Matter of fact, it had a problem with some of the microinverters, and under warranty, they replaced them all. So who
Mm-hmm.
knows? Maybe the
Maybe that's when
Chinese
they
are.
put the spyware in.
Yeah, maybe who knows? Like the Chinese are probably listening to me grunt and groan, or lifting weights
Mm-hmm.
or something. Who knows? So
Yeah.
speaking of climate, though, what do you think about that story in Switzerland, man? Did you see some of the pictures associated with that?
I did. This is heartbreaking. First, I feel for the people and their family, like the displacement, the loss. I, look, I would just say this: climate change is all around us. I still have buddies that are skeptical that it's happening. What I keep telling them is like, okay, let's just start. Who gives a shit if it's man-made or not? It's happening. We have to address it. Like right now, we've got our head in the sand. Let's actually do something about it. For gosh sakes, when we can do anything we want if we put our minds to it and collectively take action. I'll also add one last point, which is I was in Australia this last week, as I mentioned. The rest of the world has accepted this and is addressing it. And so Australia and Europe and Asia, we were there because the global utilities from those places are changing their whole energy infrastructure to adapt. And America is going to get left behind. We don't do the same.
Um, I think America is actively choosing to be left behind on this right now, at least from a policy standpoint. But it makes me actually think a little bit about. I think we've talked about how it's like a threat multiplier and about how it makes all sorts of things like more massive. One of the thoughts that during the pandemic, a writer that I like to follow, a guy named Sean Hughes, talked about that the pandemic was the greatest restriction on freedom that he had ever had in his life. Um, And I thought that was a really interesting thought because, over the arc of my life, before pre 9/11, like the US military was very focused on state action, right? Like US versus the Soviet Union with nuclear war. Let's think about that. And 9/11 was this crystallizing moment where we realized actually non-state actors have huge security threats associated with that. And I've wondered for years, especially after reading that article by Sean, is th- there's another layer of threat that we aren't really addressing here, and it's like all these things that are like the collective experience, whether it's pandemics or climate change, or these things have real impacts upon our lives, and they're only going to get worse. And if we don't start addressing them, like they're going to actually have a bigger impact on my freedom than anybody else's, or than any other sort of scenario really would. Like Osama bin Laden never went after me. You know what I mean? But that pandemic did. And even outside of the government, saying like, hey, you need to be careful. You shouldn't be going to places like this. Like I wasn't going there anyways. Like I was like, there, I had elderly people in my life that I wanted to protect. And as a result, until we got things a little bit better figured out, I retreated from the public square because I wanted to protect the people that I cared about. That was an impingement upon my freedom based upon like a non-human threat. And so like when I watched that village disappear, like I I looked around a little bit to see if there's like in history that like a glacier collapsing and swallowing a village. I don't think I couldn't find an example of that. Like this to me seems to be actually a new natural disaster. Like
Mm.
we've invented a new natural
Mm.
disaster in the human experience.
Hmm.
It's that's a threat to
Yeah,
people's freedom.
certainly. That's a massive impingement on your lifestyle would be your house getting swallowed up by a glacier. Yes. And I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I don't mean to be flippant about that. I'm just saying like these are the biggest infringements, massive infringements. When whole islands in the South Pacific disappear, big
yeah,
deal.
but it's not just like glaciers. Like I don't live under a glacier, right? So like, do I need to fear
Mm.
a glacier collapsing on me? No. But the town next door, Louisville and Superior, Colorado, woke up one morning and it was a windy day, and by the end of the day, the town was mostly gone.
Oh
A
yeah,
wildfire.
40 miles north of here, the Palisades burned down and North Pasadena burned down. Yeah, I mean this is why I say that I'm with you. It's happening all around us. Sometimes it's more storms and flooding. Sometimes it's fires. Now it's a glacier. It's just I get these events though. I guess what brings back for me is just a frustration that people are still got their heads in the sand and are trying to just wish it away, despite what's happening right in front of their eyes.
Here, here. Well, let's get to our interview.
Yeah, so we're going to talk to Michael O'Hurley today. He's originally from Ireland, although he recently became a U.S. citizen. That was a sort of long process for him. I've known him for a number of years. I met him in 2011, 12 time frame when I got to Google, and we were both on what's now called the Trust and Safety team. It was a different name back then, but it's essentially the team at Google who tries to make, at least the Google products safe for their users, fighting things like fraud and abuse and bad content, etc. Michael went on from there to Uber and Facebook. He was at Twitter when Donald Trump got his account suspended. He was there at Twitter when when Elon acquired Twitter and survived the downsizing. And so he was there during some massive transitions. And I think he's been really helpful to me, at least, as I came into that business. I was a newbie. He was a pretty senior guy. And he's been one of the chief architects of how we think about online safety and how we manage the online ecosystem. This is the algorithms and feeds that we all are subject to on Instagram and whatever. So it'd be a really interesting conversation. I want to talk to him about sort of his most recent roles at Twitter, but also his previous ones, and thinking about freedom of speech and what these algorithms are doing to our brain and all the rest of it. Michael O'Hurley, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Neil. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we have known each other for a number of years, and but it's been a while since we've caught up. So, kind of, just going to tee you up for a few sort of high level, big questions, and I think what we'll get to eventually is some stories from your time in Silicon Valley. But yeah, so I'll start with we the questions we've been wrestling with in tech, especially on the platforms that you've worked on, like Google and Uber and Twitter. Um, you know, there's this balance of free speech to safety, and we've sort of trying to wrestle with the idea of on a global platform, you know, like Google and Twitter, for example, or in the physical world with Uber, how do you think about the balance there between free speech and letting people post whatever they want and then safety on those platforms?
This is one of the hardest problems in tech. And the truth is there isn't really a perfect answer. But I'm going to kind of share how I think about this. And free speech should always be the default. Platforms should only step in when there's a compelling reason, something that crosses a clear legal or moral line. And a great baseline to start with is starting with just what's illegal. For example, there should be zero tolerance for child sexual abuse material. It's not a gray area. Same goes for terrorist recruitment content or coordinated campaigns to incite violence. These are clear cases where harm isn't theoretical, it's immediate. But beyond the obvious, things get complicated pretty fast. And historically, platforms have made these decisions behind closed doors. Processes are opaque, inconsistent, and it leaves users confused and frustrated. And in some cases, platforms protected the people posting vile things by deleting the content entirely, so others couldn't even see what's being said. And that's kind of why I support Twitter's move to label harmful content, restrict its reach, but allow people to see it and judge for themselves. It's more transparent. It kind of treats users like adults. You can decide what kind of content or what kind of people you want to follow or avoid based on what they've actually said. And this is something that I'd wanted to do for a long time. And I was really proud when we implemented it at Twitter. It
Well,
took Elon to help us.
I was going to say,
But yeah.
let's dive into the timing of that. You were there, and I know this because I know you. You were there when Twitter banned Donald Trump at sort of after the January 6th. And I believe that was the incident that did it. And then you were also there when Elon came in with the kitchen sink and cleaned house. You survived that. But is this kind of what you're talking about, the contrast of banning speech versus what Elon did to open things up?
I actually think the pre-Elon era and the post-Elon era weren't that dissimilar.
Okay.
I actually think what we did in the pre-Elon era was we applied labels. We moved pretty fast. For the 2020 election, I remember we were applying misinformation labels in real time, and we were doing it pretty consistently. We didn't always get it right. We were transparent. I think the difference in the Elon era was that we told our story better. We went out and we told people what we were going to do. Then we did it. Then we told them we did it. I actually don't think there was a huge shift. There was a little bit of movement.
I was going to say that's not consistent with most of what I read now, which is that Twitter has become a right-wing cesspool. I mean, that's the common phrase that I hear.
So I think Twitter, or X now, is a different platform.
X, sorry. Yeah.
I think if you go to your For You page, you get a very different view than you do from your following page. And that's related to the algorithm changes that they've made. But if I go to my For You page, I still get a fairly decent experience that I want. I typically avoid the follow or the For You page because I get a lot of content that I'm not super interested in. Yeah, Like if I open Twitter right now or X right now, I'll probably see 4 tweets from Elon in the first 10 tweets. That's just how the algorithm is going right now. It's not what I'm kind of hoping for. If I go to my following page, I'll see content from people who I opted in to follow and content that is what I'm searching for. And I think it works pretty well.
Well, so then if it's not that different, you were labeling things in the pre-Elon era, and now there's these the tools, which is basically like the community gets to weigh in, right? Were you a part of designing that system, or how did that come to be?
So community notes existed pre-Elon also.
Okay.
I can't remember what it was called. It had a Twitter-friendly name, but I can't remember what it was. But it existed before, but it was ramped up after. And I think they've made improvements as we've gone along. I'm just not sure. Well, community notes is much better than third-party fact checkers because it's more transparent, it's quicker, and it's open to the community. But it still doesn't solve the problem because I think we live in a world which is kind of post-truth, that people don't really want truth. They want content that aligns with their personal beliefs. And like I find it quite interesting to see. Like recently there was a post about a comedian who was apparently paid $4 million to go to Ukraine for a photo op. And this was trending all over X. And I looked at it immediately and I knew immediately this just wasn't true. It was just too far-fetched. There were no receipts. It was literally just somebody had made a claim and it went viral. And the friends that I have on the right were all going crazy over this because this was corruption. This was so bad. This was terrible. Now, a few hours later, the comedian came out and said it wasn't true. Then the story disappeared, but the feeling was still there that it was true. And like, I think we're in a world where it doesn't matter if you tell the truth. It doesn't matter if you lie. People will see the content and will like it or retweet it. And what I loved back in the sort of the Twitter days pre-acquisition, we were trying to address this in a thoughtful way. Like if somebody tried to retweet an article, we'd prompt them and say, "Hey, we noticed you haven't read the article. Do you want to read it first?" And it's trying to add friction and good friction, not to make it hard to do stuff. And it's kind of the same with nudges. If somebody went to reply to somebody and they were cursing at them, we'd probably pop up a little prompt and say, "Hey, are you sure you want to do this?" We still give them the option to post it if they want to, but then they have the option to not do it. And post Elon, when we launched freedom of speech, we took it to a whole new level. And we found some fascinating things because we'd let you say anything, but if it hit some of our criteria, we would notify you and say, "Hey, this violates our hateful conduct policy. The content is still there, but we're not going to algorithmically promote it." And what that did was, which kind of shocked me, in the first few weeks, we found that I think it was something around 40% of people who posted this and got a label would delete the tweet and then would post a tweet again to the same person with modified content. So they'd take out the slur and continue the conversation. So it actually positively changed user behavior. And that to me was good. And I want people to have free speech, but I also want them to have accountability. That if you go on and start dropping slurs at people, why should the platform remove the content and let you get away with it? Because you had your impact by the person seeing the content, then they delete it as if it never happened. I want people to say, "Hey, look, this ass made this comment."
Yeah. So that makes a ton of sense to me, and that sounds like a win. I want to zoom out a little bit. The spread of misinformation on new platforms like Twitter and Facebook, you were at Facebook too, may be the issue of our time. People don't know today, where to go for accurate information. And so I want to kind of press you a little bit on the idea that, if X is still allowing anybody to post anything, as long as it doesn't cross one of those, hate speech or child sexual abuse and imagery, et cetera, they can post any false information they want. Does the platform have any responsibility to try to make obvious when something's clearly just wrong, clearly just false?
So before I jump into that one specifically, what's the difference between, say, CNN versus Fox News, where I can turn on the news and a politician comes on and makes a statement and it's clearly demonstrably false, but
Yeah.
it was still published there. But let me jump into the misinformation specifically. The first problem I see is, like, how do you define misinformation? Because if I say that the San Jose Sharks are the greatest hockey team in history, right?
They're
It's
not.
demonstrably
But okay.
false, but is that misinformation? And then what if something is just taken out of context or is misleading in the way that it's shared? And it becomes really, really hard, because you're then expecting a platform who have hundreds of millions of posts per day to try to determine in real time whether something was true, whether it's partially true, whether it's false, whether it's malice. Like, we have systems in place to address this in the courts. If somebody comes on and makes a claim about you, you kind of have to go to court. And I'm not sure on misinformation if that's something that we should be trying to police. Because if a person makes one claim, would the best way be for the platform to say, we believe this is misinformation? Or for somebody else to come back and say, well, this isn't true because of this, and actually allow a discourse? Because otherwise you're expecting a platform to get it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost all the time.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I might jump in on this a little bit. So I can understand like a ton of volume associated with this, right? But like also there is a degree of platforming. It's called a platform, in which you give somebody the ability to speak, and the algorithm reinforces that. You have terms of service as well. And so maybe, I'm not expecting, Twitter or whomever to be able to police every single comment. But if somebody has a history of saying dishonest things, shouldn't they be, to use your example, shouldn't they be turned down on the algorithm rather than turned up?
So I think it should be based on the content level, not based on the person level. Because people say good things and people say bad things. And if you're bucketing somebody, like, how do you actually decide somebody is in the bad camp? Like, if somebody just comes out and says that Taylor Swift is the worst singer in the world or the best singer in the world, like, it's all opinion-based stuff. And again, when you come into some of the political challenges, it becomes much more difficult. But should a platform be restricting the reach of a president or a presidential candidate?
I mean, to lean into that though, like if somebody's saying there are facts, like we'll agree that there are things that are true and untrue, right? And so if somebody has a history of saying lies, untrue things, like why shouldn't they lose their ability to engage in it?
So the challenge is that the black and white stuff is fairly easy to say that something is a lie. But then you have stuff that falls in the gray area. If somebody comes out and says that Democrats want to take away your guns, that sounds like it's not true. But then there was something that happened a couple of years ago where I think it was the Hawaiian Congress voted to remove guns. So it's partially true. And the challenge here is that you have things that are never really black and white, or you don't have, in a timely way, full information. And should there even be a responsibility on the platform, or should the accountability be on the person? And then, like, if somebody says something bad about you, are you then responsible for taking action? Like there isn't a perfect solution. It's a hard space.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say on that point, there is no perfect solution. I'll grant you that. And I'll also just say up front, I'm a near absolutist when it comes to free speech. I think I've said to Mike before, like the answer for speech you don't like is more speech. That said, I mean, maybe we put this in the context of where we were and where we are now. I mean, when you and I were at Google and when you were at Facebook, I presume we had this sort of mindset that we were going to do some amount of accountability. We were going to proactively flag things and take things down and curate to some extent. And I think you look at, Zuckerberg has moved to DC and has taken a new tack that's much more like what Elon has done with X recently. There's just seeming a shift on these platforms. Is this a healthy shift in your opinion? That, a more hands-off approach that's, it's different anyway.
Yeah. So it's definitely different. I think when I look back at what some of the platforms were doing, like third-party fact-checking, I've never been a fan of, because the time it takes for the fact-checkers to accept the job to then produce a report means that by the time they've come back days to weeks later, it's kind of irrelevant. And to me, the most important part here is actually speed. And this is something that I think Freedom of Speech Not Reach did a really good job of doing, where when content was posted, we would check the content, and if it hit criteria, we'd apply a label at tweet creation. So we'd immediately start restricting reach. Now, what we also did was we made it very transparent. We told the user, and the user had the ability to appeal. And what we found was some users, I remember at the time, it was like in the 2 to 3% of users would appeal, and about 40% of them would have the appeals granted, and we'd overturn it. And the thing is, we were doing it very, very fast. And it meant that like when people would use slurs or other words in a different context, our models weren't smart enough at the time to differentiate. But we'd have a human jump in a matter of minutes and actually remove the label and get it right. And that to me is the best bad outcome. Like it's not perfect. Like ideally, we'd have LLMs solving everything at point of time. But the challenge is you have people who have sort of content being shared out of context. You have people who are trolls. And I think trolls should have a place on the internet. I think everyone should have a place on the internet. And that's difficult because at times some people want the world to burn.
This is a perfect lead into my next question, which is going to be, was the decision to take Donald Trump off of the Twitter platform in 2021 the right decision?
That's a really tough question to answer. And like,
speaking of trolls, sorry.
So to me, like things like incitement to violence is where I draw a much harder line. Like, I think people should be allowed to say silly things on the internet, but when they're trying to cause real world harm, I think it's different. And like, thinking back to those days, I struggle with the actual decision. I think I supported it at the time because what was happening in the country was pretty scary and pretty horrifying. But it's a hard decision to take. In one word, I think probably yes, it was the right call. But there's a lot more context to it. And I don't think it's a decision that should be taken lightly. But what had happened at the time was pretty terrifying and scary.
I guess why are there, to me, when he was removed from Twitter, that was late. There had been plenty of incitements to violence prior to that had absolutely blown apart the terms and conditions associated with the user agreements. And so, like, why is there a special rules for the connected on this one?
So it wasn't special rules for the connected. And if you go back and look at the policies at the time, there was a world leaders policy, which was public. And the thing is, as a technology platform, I don't think Twitter should be preventing world leaders from speaking. And I actually think we did a pretty decent job, not just with President Trump, but with other world leaders around the time, of applying labels when they went over the line. We didn't remove the content, or we rarely removed the content. Instead, we put a label on it to say that this was misinformation or this was whatever the label was, and we prevented engagement. And the thing is, like, I think people who are connected in general will always have access because they have a big megaphone. So maybe they skip the queue. But I don't think the rules should be applied differently to them. I think the rules should be applied the same. Again, world leaders, there was a special carve-out rule. But if you have musicians who go a little bit crazy on a platform, I think the same rules should be applied. And the thing is, they'll still be able to call executives or owners and complain, and that'll get them to the top of the queue. But I find it really hard to even remember a time where we bent the rules, because we try to ensure that we document, that we're consistent, that we're fair. And when we're wrong, we hold our hand up and we say it. And this is something which I remember around the 2020 election. I think sometime after the election, there was a post from somebody in DHS who had talked about rapists and murderers. And he talked about this coming across the border. And this came into our team. And within a matter of minutes, we'd actually removed the content or applied a label. We'd actually taken action on the content because it was wrong. And they appealed it. And then the next day, we actually got in a room with some of the lawyers and we talked through. And what had happened was they hadn't actually used the term of the group. They just talked about rapists and murderers. So technically, it wasn't a violation. So we accepted it. We overturned it. We put the content back on the platform. And I remember Jack Dorsey was called in front of Congress the following week, and he was being shouted at. And it was actually one of my proudest moments, because Jack stood up and said, yep, the team labeled the content. It was appealed. We looked at it the next day. We realized it was a mistake. And we overturned it. Sorry.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the discussion.
Yeah.
There was no more reach. We moved fast. We got it wrong. We were told. We fixed it. That's kind of the best case, best worst case.
I mean, I can appreciate some of that, but also like this concern, like there is a rule actually in the system that you described it as far as world leaders, like the connected actually do get special preference here. If a world leader were to call for violence or war, isn't there some responsibility of the platform for sharing that message, especially since they know if this is an individual that has previously incited violence?
So the thing is, I think that world leaders policy is more aligned with the new freedom of speech, not reach, that the content stays on the platform. So pre-Elon, we had a special carve out for world leaders, but I think it's a defensible policy. Like, I would not like world leaders to have their content removed by a platform. It's a tricky one. Like, what if they just start texting or emailing to their group, and then you have sort of a narrow set of the population receiving updates from a world leader, or if they post it on their own website? It's a tricky one, because like their decisions and their voice matters. So
let me dig into I mean, first, I'm personally curious about the, acquisition. Elon comes in with the kitchen sink and huge number of people get fired. Somehow you survive. Can you talk to us about that time? And where I'm going with this is, one, you've changed policies. We've talked about that. Twitter's a slightly different place, but also in the context of Doge and what he tried to do, which was very reminiscent. He sent an email to most of the U.S. government that had the same sort of subject line, right? How was that experience for you going through the transition a couple of years ago?
So it was very hard because I was really excited when he had decided to take over. Like I thought it was an opportunity for us to move faster. Like Twitter 1.0 was an amazing place. There were incredible people at Twitter who were very, very well intended, who really cared about what they were doing. But we struggled with execution. Like I think we built some amazing foundations at Twitter, but we were slow because you really needed to get everybody on board to make changes. And it was challenging, but I think there was a lot of amazing foundational stuff done. When Elon was coming in, I was hopeful. I was excited. I, I was kind of thinking, wow, these guys are going to come in and help us. I don't think they realized how hard it was. Like, I don't think they understood. I think they believed they had all the answers, but they had no context of what was actually involved in running a social media platform. I think they had good intentions. I think they wanted to do the right stuff, but pretty quickly they realized, actually, this stuff is way harder than we imagined. And like the way the layoffs happened, it was very upsetting to see. And there was a little bit of survivorship guilt. And I think a lot of the folks who stayed really cared about the platform and being shepherds of the platform and making sure that the platform would keep going. But it was a difficult time. And like when you lose 30 or 40% of your org overnight, that's challenging. And when you have no real sort of job security, and when you see people being fired on the spot for making jokes or for saying something.
Wait, that
That wasn't
happened?
well.
Somebody got fired for making the wrong comment?
It was in one of the books. You'll be able to see it,
Okay.
where somebody told Elon that he wasn't popular anymore or something along those lines, and
Oh, man.
he got spot
Yeah, okay.
fired. And it was the principal engineer or somebody. So, but the thing is, I stayed there for a year because I still believed in what we were doing. We got to accelerate certain things and make a very positive change. And that was exciting. But there were just other times where there were decisions being made similar to Doge, where they sounded great on paper, but it was kind of having responsibility for the decision, but not the accountability for the outcomes or the unintended consequences. So sure, we can fire another 20 people today, but these 5 services are going to stop working. Are we okay with that? That conversation didn't happen. It was more, fire those people, figure it out. And that to me was quite troubling and challenging.
Yeah. So in that respect, like, you've been watching Doge like the rest of us, the way Mike and I talk about it is like, it works in the actually, I've had the assumption that it works in the private sector. You fire until somebody squeals. And if you really miss a service, or to your point, like if you fire those 20 people and then a month later you realize that you shouldn't have, you can go find people to come back in and maybe you only hire 10 back. But there's some logic to that on the private sector. But it takes 6 months to hire somebody in the government. A lot of people, it's hard to find people with the kind of experience that you need in the government. It's just a different animal. I mean, I was an active duty Marine for 12 years. I can speak to some level of what it's like to work in a gigantic bureaucracy like that. I think Have you been watching this Doge experience with, I don't know, is it giving you flashbacks, or is it somehow better or worse than I would expect?
It's very similar. And I remember speaking to some friends when it was first happening that the private sector versus public sector is a huge issue, because I can easily go today and say, okay, this train line that goes to rural X only has 12 people a day on it. Let's shut it down. This hospital in this region only has capacity for 400 patients. Let's shut it down. We're going to save this amount of dollars. And it's a really great talking point, because you can talk about the inefficiencies and you can talk about these things. But we're not a for-profit organization as a government. We're there to provide services to people. And if it means shutting this hospital down saves you $1 million, but there's 15 people who are due to have a heart attack in the next 12 months are going to die because their closest hospital is now 8 hours away, it's the unintended consequences and the human aspect of it. Like, if you look purely at the math, it maybe doesn't make sense to have that hospital there. But when you look at the human aspect, it should be there. Same with public transport. Like, there's a lot of these things where you can stop funding things, you can cut the stuff down. But it's also not just a matter of finding sort of a find and replace for DEI or find and replace for trans and cut the budget, because then you end up with the transgenic mice situation. And you're kind of going, wow. And like the thing is, like, the DEI stuff that exists, I think it is so critical. Like, there's certain parts of it that can be taken out of context and be seen as being wrong. But like, having diverse groups of people working on problems helps you make better solutions. If everybody was like me, it would not be a good world, because I have my views and I would optimize for me. The thing is, you need to have diverse perspectives. And I really liked that at Twitter. It made it hard, because you had to try to have conversations, but like, having people with different goals and different perspectives and different backgrounds was quite amazing. And I like my final point just on Doge. I think what I had suggested at the beginning was we'd hear all these big numbers that sound really impressive, and then the reality would kick in and it would start dropping back and dropping back and dropping back. And I think that's what we're starting to see now, that a lot of the promised savings are not there. Is government inefficient? Yes. Are companies inefficient? Yes. Can you make them more efficient? You can, but I'd rather use a scalpel rather than a baseball bat.
Chainsaw,
So, yeah.
I'd say we're.
A chainsaw is another, yeah. I wouldn't use a chainsaw for that.
All right. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about algorithms. And, I mentioned sort of issue of our time, misinformation, and where to get information and trust it. The other thing we're really wrestling with, especially those of us with little ones, is algorithms and our feeds, right? And this is true for, TikTok. If you're on TikTok, it's true for Twitter for sure. It's, Instagram, etc. How do you think about those arguments that on both sides, where you've got folks who are like, look, it's providing me with the content that I want, that I'm interested in, and others that are making the argument that it's rewiring our brains and corrupting us in some ways?
Yeah. So there's an idea out there that the tech companies are engineering their algorithms to maximize outrage or misinformation just to reduce engagement. And I've been in a lot of the rooms at Google, at Facebook, at Twitter, and I don't believe that to be true. Now, you'll disagree, but let me go a little further and then we can debate it. So I think most people who work at these companies are genuinely trying to do the right thing. And the problem isn't malice, rather complexity. So we're working with imperfect systems at massive scale, trying to balance competing priorities in real time, and often you have limited context. And maybe I have rose tinted glasses, but I don't ever recall anybody kind of saying, let's do the wrong thing because it gets more clicks. And the people who are building the systems are deeply thoughtful and they care about the consequences of what they're putting into the world. But the challenge is that a lot of decisions are made with real time information that's incomplete. And when you get those bad outcomes, you're trying to choose a decision to go for bad outcome one or bad outcome two. And you don't know which one is worse. And you may never find out which one is worse. And the challenge is, do you wait and let it see how it plays out? And it could get much, much worse. Or do you take action quicker and try to apply some sort of remediation? So, like, I don't feel that platforms are willfully amplifying harm, but we have blunt tools, enormous scale, and we're trying to course correct as we go. And like companies have done things like downranking borderline content, adding prompts before tweets, boosting authoritative sources around elections or crises. And most of these are mission-driven choices rather than engagement-driven choices. And the challenge, getting back to the algorithm, is that algorithms are good at predicting what will keep people's attention, but not good at understanding why. And if you're not careful, you can kind of lead to reinforcing division or sensationalism, not because it was necessarily designed that way, but because we didn't step in sooner to guide it. And that's kind of my insider perspective. And I'm sure there's disagreement, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the part of that there is the incentive for the company, Facebook or whoever, is to keep your attention. And so if the algorithm is going to do that, is going to be optimized for that, then it isn't necessarily going to drive you to stay on the platform, to spend more time on the platform, which means I honestly, my inner voice, when I have to peel myself away from Instagram, and I'm not on there very much, but I'll spend 10 minutes when I'm sitting in the dentist office or something like that. And I have to consciously say to myself, like, I need to turn off my lizard brain and move to the next task, whatever that is. And it's not easy. And I think what I recognize in myself there is that somebody has tapped into something in my brain that wants me to keep going. I want to see the next story, the next picture, the next reel, whatever it is, because I know it's going to give me another, like now I'm stepping outside myself again. It's going to give me another chemical hit, dopamine or whatever. I'm not a medical person, so I don't know what it is, but it is a drug that gives me some sort of like, positive reinforcement. And so if you back all the way back up to what is Facebook incentivized to do? Sell more ads. They sell more ads by keeping me on the platform. And then they keep me on the platform by feeding me this stuff that feeds my lizard brain. Yeah, that's not my incentive. My incentive is to, spend a couple minutes like turning my brain off, but then being able to disengage whenever I want. Yeah, that's the balance that I'm fighting. And then, and I'm being long-winded here, but I'll put this back to our kids. This is why, kids have so much vulnerability here. Because I've got the self-awareness to have this inner conversation with myself to like, I need to turn my lizard brain off. But my 11-year-old definitely doesn't. Maybe when he turns 14 or 15, he'll be better at it, but probably not until he's 26.
Yeah, it's a really tough challenge. And like just thinking of the kids challenge, like we went and traveled around the world last year. And when we got to Africa, we were going to go on safari. And we'd never had tablets or anything before, but we got them iPads for the safari because we were going to spend 10 to 12 hours out on safari. And we made a trade-off decision. Now, we gave them lockdown iPads with PBS Kids and a couple of little things. But it was a decision that we made which is a balance of sort of going crazy on Safari or having an iPad. Now, we don't let them watch YouTube, we don't let them on Chrome, we don't let them do other things. But it's a balance that we make. And thinking like, when will my kids get a cell phone? I haven't gotten that far yet. That's several years away. But it's a hard thing, and like I do keep them away from algorithmic content as much as possible. Although they do go to Netflix, and Netflix has a similar thing because Netflix knows what to do next, and my kids can sort of go there and turn it on. And they'll ask, "Can they turn it on?" And then they'll go and they'll do it, and it's hard to get them away. But I'm not sure if it's necessarily a solvable problem. But going back to the Safari thing, when we got into Safari, my daughter had watched lots of Wildcrats, and she blew the mind of our tour guide because she knew everything about every animal. So, like, there's positives that come out of this as well. Like, she can tell you everything about every animal. And, like, that's an education thing, that's a learning thing. And she wants more Wildcrats. She wants more learning about this stuff. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. So what I would say about that is like I think you've identified that like these social media platforms are not healthy for children, right? And you're intentionally keeping your own children away from it, as am I. And that I don't want to confound or confuse the like Wild Kratts, which is an intentionally crafted show made for children, meant to be educational, with the open algorithm of what's being fed to a lot of children. Like, why is there not a responsibility of the social media platforms to screen children?
I think it's a great question. And I think there are some legislative moves at the moment to have better age gating. And like, I know, like, from my perspective, I'd love to see the actual phone companies, or sorry, the phone manufacturers, Apple and Google, doing the age gating. Because I don't really want to have to verify my kid's age to 7 or 8 or 10 different apps if they're using one physical device. And the challenge as well with a lot of this is that it's not just about clicking a box and saying I'm over 18, because that's currently the current way a lot of platforms do is, are you over 18 years of age, or enter your date of birth. It's not really a great system. And maybe there's better ways. And I think with AI, I think there likely are. And I did an AI safety governance course recently, with a company in the UK, and it was amazing to learn about this. But part of the effort was to do a project in AI governance, and I built a chatbot in WhatsApp, and I was thinking about doing age gating and how we would do the age type behavior, and it didn't really make sense to ask people explicitly because they're not necessarily going to tell the truth, and it also makes for a lot of unnecessary friction. But what I built into the chatbot as I was going was actually looking for indicators that the person was under 18. So if they talk about high school, if they talk about certain events, and the LLM is incredibly good at determining somebody isn't an adult. And what I've done is it actually goes through, and each time there's an interaction, it actually takes the prior interactions and tries to determine, are there any signals that this user is a minor? And if we get a confident signal, we close them out and we say, no more, you can't access it anymore. It's designed for adults. So trying to put it into an app and say, are you 18? Yes. Like, kids are very good at bypassing, but having constant monitoring, ongoing monitoring, detecting could be a positive thing. But I'm going to go slightly broader again, because the thing is, a lot of the challenges that we're talking about here kind of already exist in other spaces. Like, they exist in school, like cyberbullying versus real life bullying in school. They're both problems. Now, cyberbullying makes things a lot easier. You can have bigger reach. You can do it in different ways. But a lot of that stuff exists. And it's, I'm not sure if you can have a fully solvable problem because prohibition doesn't work. And like, the other thing is I'd argue that companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter care about doing the right thing for kids. The people who work there care about doing the right thing for kids. And if there was just a switch to turn to reduce profits and protect kids, it would be taken immediately. It's just that I don't think there is a straightforward solution because suddenly a kid starts using their parent's phone. So they're signed in as the parent. They can do the same stuff. Like, do you know of any sort of solutions to solve the problem? Because I agree with the concern, but I think there's a lot of effort going in to solve these problems. They're just very hard to get comprehensive solutions.
So one of the thoughts that Elon himself had was is that every account needs to be identified, right? It needs to be legitimate. And so, like, why haven't my LinkedIn account is connected to my my driver's license? Like, I have been verified for LinkedIn for free, and so they know that I'm a real human being, and they also know what my age is, right? And so, like, why is there not something similar? Like, if you don't have an ID and you're over, driver's license in this country 16, like, you don't get access to this material.
No, I think that's a fair approach, but I would actually argue against the kind of real names and real people policies. Neil will remember from the Google days when Google launched Google Plus and came up with the real name policies. It was a nightmare. And I think what's super about Twitter right now is that there's a pseudo anonymity because people can have different personas online. And I think that's a good thing. Like having some kind of way of validating that somebody is a real person doesn't prevent trolling, doesn't prevent abuse. There's folks on the main platforms who are famous, who are jerks, who behave in a negative way. And the thing is, like, I think people should be allowed to have that level of anonymity because, like, everybody has their personal things and their personal issues where they can get help. And there's some platforms online where you can actually have real experiences and positive experiences anonymously. And if we take that away, it's kind of forcing people, often people who are in sort of marginalized communities, from getting support. And I read on Reddit quite often sort of interactions from people who get a lot of help. And I tweeted about this recently that I kind of go to Reddit for my sort of more human touch, where I'll go to Reddit and I'll actually ask a question anonymously and get really good advice. And like Gaddit on Reddit is somewhere where I learn a lot about parenting. And a lot of the questions that are asked there, you can't really ask as yourself. Like you can't out yourself because it would be awkward. So you're asking questions that you can't really solve elsewhere. And I couldn't post some of that stuff on Twitter. I wouldn't like people to know more about my personal life on Twitter. So I think anonymity is actually a positive thing. Like Elon had talked about, you pay $1, a token amount to have a new account. But all that does is it increases the cost slightly, and then you just do the ROI calculation. At the moment, it's free. Okay, so we want 100,000 accounts. That's $100,000. If we're getting more than $100,000 in return, it's worthwhile. So it's just a calculation thing there, or an ROI calculation. So I'm not sure I necessarily want all these platforms to know everything about me. I'm not sure if it'll be used appropriately, effectively. I do trust companies like Google a lot. Like having been on the inside, like I would be totally fine uploading my tax details and everything to my Google Drive, and I know that they're going to be safe. I feel less comfortable giving my details to the US government than I do to a company like Google because I trust what's happening at the tech companies. And maybe I'm biased. Maybe I'm just not sort of, again, maybe it's rose tinted glasses, but I trust the companies. And I'm like, just going back to your point though, like, I think maybe there's an advantage to having ID verification for certain services, and maybe certain platforms should have it. I know we'd spoken it about like things like OnlyFans, and some of the porn companies have required content producers to upload their personal detail. And I think that's a good decision because that's helping solve another problem of sort of minors and sort of people who are being exploited. But it doesn't feel super American for you to have to give an ID to go on and randomly post a tweet, or to go onto an online platform and troll somebody. Forcing you to have your ID kind of feels a little bit overreach, and not necessarily the place I'd go. But I understand the challenge on the children part.
I mean,
But
to me,
yeah,
the American component of it is the America I know is if you want to stand in the public square, you need to show your face. And if you're not going to show your face in the public square, like there are places where you can go for anonymity, like Alcoholics Anonymous in the real world. But like where there's an agreement, everybody here is going to protect one another's identity. Right. But like if you're standing in the public square, you don't hide.
are you sure? Like, you can go with your mask on and you can start spouting nonsense. And
I've spent a lot of time in the public square, and I don't see a whole lot of people hiding behind masks. And when they do, usually they're up to no good. Now that said, they have the right to do that, but very rarely do you run into people in real life that are hiding behind a mask.
but I think you're thinking slightly mainstream. Like, if you go into other areas, like where people from marginalized communities, like, do you think it would be fair to go along to the Castro in San Francisco, start taking pictures of all the people who are there, and then outing them as being gay? Like, people who have their own private life, who are going in public, but trying to do it. Like, the challenge I have is that you end up with what you're talking about in the mainstream seems fair. If you're going to talk in the town square and put yourself out there, you should be there. But if you're going somewhere where you maybe haven't come out and then somebody else is forcing you out, or if you're somebody who, I'm trying to think of some better example, but like just people who should potentially be protected by society because they're vulnerable. It's if somebody is in an abusive relationship and they're looking for help, they can't post on Facebook, but they could go to some other platform pseudo-anonymously and get support. Like, the problem is that for the mainstream, I kind of agree with you. I think it's fair. If you've got a big megaphone, you should have some kind of proof of who you are. And maybe what you're going at then is saying, okay, if you've got more than a certain number of followers, you should be required to have this. Or if you've got more than a certain amount of reach, you should have some kind of ID verification. I just don't think it's a one size fits all. Because if you then try and do it, what you're doing is you're driving people onto other platforms that don't have the same rules, like 4chan or 8chan. And that's where I think you get unintended second order effects. And that's where it gets kind of tricky. So I agree on the mainstream, but I think you need to have carve outs for the edge cases where the value of having an ID verification outweighs the sort of the risk that the person takes on. If somebody's a whistleblower, if somebody's in a marginalized community, if somebody is just at risk. And the thing is, when you go beyond the US as well, it gets more complicated. Like, would it be okay for the US government to have my ID? Sure. Would it be okay for the Pakistani government to have every Twitter user's ID? I think we're going to say that's a challenge. Like,
So there's another great segue there, Michael. This is my last question, actually, and it's about TikTok, right? Which wraps up what you were just talking about with IDs, also algorithms. Do you consider TikTok to be a national security threat?
I like TikTok as a platform. I think it helps put my brain to sleep, and I appreciate that. But I think it's a reasonable question to ask national security questions about TikTok. I think any platform with that level of reach and influence, especially one owned by a company in the jurisdiction of the Chinese government, deserves some level of scrutiny. But it doesn't mean that we should panic and ban them. But we do need some level of oversight. And the concern goes beyond just data privacy. I think the big question I have is around influence. If a foreign government can subtly shape what people in another country see or don't see, that's a vulnerability. And that's why governments, including ours, are right to take it seriously. Um, I do know a lot of people working at TikTok, and they came from companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter. And they're people who I have worked with, who I respect, and I think they have great integrity. They're mission driven, they care about user safety, and they're people who I would sort of back to do the right thing. So the challenge isn't really that TikTok is staffed by bad actors, it's the governance structure. And they're subject to Chinese law. It does introduce risks that need to be accounted for, no matter well or how well intentioned the team actually are. So I also don't think these issues are unique to TikTok. I think every major platform, American or otherwise, has challenges around algorithmic transparency, data security, foreign influence. And TikTok probably feels more acute because of geopolitics. But the underlying structural weakness is industry wide. So I don't think the answer is around banning a single app. It's more about raising the bar across the board, like better transparency, better privacy, better data handling, and more algorithmic accountability. So it's not really about where the company is headquartered. It's more about being able to prove how openly they operate. And if a platform is sharing public discourse at scale, it should be able to show how it works. And that's really the sustainable way forward.
Your point, I don't think any of the companies are doing that sort of algorithmic transparency. I think this is part of why people are afraid of it, is because it's clouded in secrecy. And so people fear what they don't understand and can't see.
Yeah, Twitter did start with algorithmic transparency by publishing the algorithm 2 years ago. But
Okay.
I made a joke on Twitter recently, and I tweeted at them asking has somebody forgotten the password, because it hasn't been updated in 2 years.
Oh boy.
So, like, I think they had the intention to do it, and they started with it, but then it fell off somewhere. Maybe somebody who did it got laid off.
Oh,
and
that's
stopped happening.
Well, the kitchen sink is still wreaking havoc apparently. Well, that's a good spot to end it. Michael, it's been awesome to catch up, and really appreciate the perspective that many of us don't have. You've been at the center of the action many times. And, from when Trump got banned from Twitter and got back on Twitter, and when Elon came in, and it's been quite a ride, Michael, and wish you all the best of success moving forward. Thanks for being here.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, guys.
I enjoyed that interview, Neil, even though I have to admit there was a couple times there where I was finding myself a little angered, and maybe that came across there, not at Michael, but at the concept that like something couldn't be done on some of this stuff, or that like because of the complexity that like there was just some things that were going to have to be accepted. And it made me think a little bit about like the idea that like it sounded very much like that in this particular case, the humans were working for the machine, right? They were working for the algorithm, the process, and like there were some things that they could control, but because the interaction between humans and machine is messy, and humans themselves have like a lot of ulterior motives, that like there was only so much that could be done. And it made me think about. I reference this book frequently. Is Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, and he talks about like how like kind of the next evolution of consciousness is actually is like as we is going to be machine, like that we are almost the progenitors of the age of machines. And it kind of made me feel like that's what's going on with some of the stuff that he's been working on.
Mm.
I don't know if I'm ready for that yet.
Yeah, I'll say on the good side, I've been sort of trying to figure out how the new Twitter is X. I'm supposed to call it X. Is has changed, and whether it's good or bad. I mean, I'm all for free speech. I'm a near absolutist on that front, as I've said before, but I hear over and over again, and I'm not a heavy X user, but I hear over and over again that it's just a cesspool now, and there's so much crap that you have to fight through. But listening to Michael, his point is it's got to self-police. What we were trying to do back in the Google days was police to some extent what we saw, and that made us the arbiters of all sorts of things. And it doesn't feel like, to me, the right answer is just to take the gloves off and let it all work itself out. That doesn't seem like the right answer either. But to your point, to come back to your point, I think, yeah, he made very clear that there is no perfect answer here. The only perfect answer then, I guess, is just disengage, to just decide to not be on the platforms, or to decide to be on certain platforms that are civil discourse, or more trustworthy in whatever way you sort of subjectively decide that to be. But I really appreciate the peek under the hood. It is, I think, at least hopefully helpful to our listeners that, this is a messy process for the folks who have been at the, hitting the button to disable accounts and to take tweets down and things like that. Yeah, you maybe the way you solve this is just to not be on the platform at all.
My personal life, increasingly, that's the choice that I am making, and I've seen quite a few of my friends make as well.
Yeah.
So,
same. I'm not on Facebook at all. I sort of sometimes read X. Instagram gets me because it's like pictures, and as I said in the interview, my lizard brain engages, and I have to purposely disengage. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that may be the right answer.
I mean, it saddens me a little bit because I am on Facebook, and like one of the things that like I value about it is that there is for my Naval Academy class, there is a forum for us all to interact with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the fact that we have known identities of people that have been selected into the group and have to be approved based upon a certain degree of membership.
Yeah,
I think that's a value, and I wish the social media companies could clean their act up a little bit more. So like we could have this online space where like I didn't have to deal with all the noise and the hatred.
Yeah.
So well, how about you tell me about your good, bads, and others, man, as we're heading into the weekend?
Yeah, well, so my good is that Trump signed an executive order that makes at least theoretically possible 400 gigawatts of nuclear capacity by 2050. I love that. The world needs more energy, all types of energy. I advocate for an all of the above strategy. And, I'm working on wind, but nuclear is a key part of the puzzle here too. So, 2 thumbs up. My bad, I actually had 2 bads this week. One is that, a little bit ago was Memorial Day. And, for some reason this year, it just hit me harder. Some years, my routine is that I go to a cemetery. I spend the first part of the day, I crack a beer. I have one beer and I pour one out for the fallen. And I sort of consciously try to be sad for the first part of the day. And then I turn around, go home and barbecue and enjoy America in the second half of the day. It sort of feels like the right balance of like remember the fallen, but then turn around and enjoy what they died for. But this year I had a really hard time shifting gears. I can't explain why. I just stayed sad most of the day. So that was no fun. As I said, I don't, there's no reason, doesn't have to have a reason. It's just that day sucked. My second, what's that?
Yeah, I was going to just kind of anchor on that for a second a little bit. I was on a podcast the other day called The Home Front, and it was about Memorial Day, and I got to talk about like a couple of fallen shipmates of mine. So one was my roommate at the Naval Academy. And in that podcast, you know, you get to tell a couple stories about that, but you also like had, you know, the interviewer, the host asked, you know, like, what do you think about like kind of like their sacrifice? And for me, sometimes the thing that makes me sad about it is not only that they gave up, like we talked about with your uncle, like 80 years of sunrises, right? And then everything that, but like also what did they give it up for? And I don't totally feel like our country is living up to like that sacrifice. You know, it's an imperfect country. There's a lot of things, you know, we've been doing right and wrong for a long time, but it just doesn't really feel like there's a whole lot of people that are committed to taking care of their neighbor or doing something for their community. Or it feels like we're just so atomized and self-focused right now. And that for me is why like the sadness lingers on Memorial Day. I don't know if you had a feeling like that.
Yeah, I will say this, what resonates with me there is when I used to put up the American flag, it was a very clear, just bursting sense of pride. And now it's a bit mixed. I guess I'm feeling the imperfectness of America now. You know, when I talk to my international friends, this is, and also I just sort of reconcile in my head. Look, I didn't vote for Trump, but we collectively, America, we did. This is what we want. This is apparently who we are. And that takes that's a hard pill to swallow for me because it's not my vision of America. You know, for example, I was driving just earlier today and I saw a flag for the first time. You know, you got those folks on the side of the road selling Trump merch. It said Trump 2028. You're like, what the fuck, dude? Because right next to it was an American flag. I'm like, hold on, but if like the American flag is about the U.S. Constitution, like it's an agreement on how we settle our disagreements. That's what the Constitution is. And if you are flying the American flag, to me, that's a representation that I've signed up to that agreement. Trump 2028 would be a clear violation of the Constitution. Like flat out, no, I don't think there's any legal question about that. It's just clearly a violation of the Constitution. So that's where I'm just, sometimes I'm a bit baffled by where we are today. And the sort of dissonance, if you will, the conflict with ourselves about who we are and where we're going. So anyway, I put up the American flag in front of my house for Memorial Day, and I looked at it for a minute before I rolled it out just to like take a deep breath and think about what it means. And it's different now than it was 10 years ago. So I'll go, my second bad is really this, what, you know, so-called big, beautiful bill. I'm just like beside myself because it's, you know, increases the debt. It's going to kick people off of health insurance. It's going to divest from energy dominance. Even though we say we're investing in energy, it's actually a big divestment from a big chunk of our ability to achieve and maintain energy independence. I mean, it's great. It secures the border. Cool. But other than that, it basically just gives a big tax cut to the rich. And you're like, what the, I don't even know what to say, man. Like if it passes and it's going to go through the Senate and I'm sure it's going to get tempered, but also like it's not at all aligned with the rhetoric that that Trump got elected on, which I can get behind. A lot of what he talked about, I could get behind, but that's not what's in this bill. It's 100% not. At least not as currently written. Anyway, and then my other of the week, what I want to watch is, Apple rejected Elon's satellite offer. If you don't have an iPhone, you may not be aware, but like your iPhone can actually tap into satellites today. They offer that service for free. It's like if you're out of cell phone service and you break your leg on a remote hiking trail somewhere, you can actually make an emergency call via satellite, and Apple provides that for free. They were trying to negotiate a deal with Starlink to make this, more global coverage, etc. And anyway, they can't come to terms, and it's just another reason why we need more competition in this space. Starlink can't be the only option, and we'll see. I think Apple really wants this deal. I think Elon's got a lot of power. Maybe this is what brings him back to the tech world, and he can help solve this in a more constructive way. So I'm hopeful because that would be an amazing technical capability and differentiator. I would love to have that. I would pay for it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Reminds me of the discussion we had about Kuiper being launched as well. Maybe a little more competition here would be a good thing. So, all right. Well, for me, my goods, just before the recording of this podcast, I got to go to my son's 5th grade continuation ceremony, which was kind of a nice little thing. We didn't have like elementary school graduations when you and I were kids, or at least I didn't. But it meant a lot for me with my kid. He had a bit of a checkered start to his elementary school. He really didn't want to be there, and so ton of issues associated with that. Kind of a classic story of a gifted kid not being challenged appropriately, and people didn't quite understand him. We ended up getting him into the gifted public school here in Denver, and it's been all the world. Like the kid, he's on. Yeah, kid's off the launch pad and ready to go, and I'm just really, really excited about it. Both for him, his mother, my wife, is super excited about it, and I can't tell you how proud I am of him of like making that gear shift and getting it into the next thing. For me, the bad, my bad this week is, and this is maybe a little counterintuitive, is that the Naval Academy has returned a lot of its books to its library that were originally banned. And that sounds like great news, except for the fact that what they ended up doing is formalizing the process of book banning. And so they most of the books were returned. It was unclear why they were ever out. And then they've created this committee of people to select books for the Naval Academy. That's not the librarians at the Naval Academy. It's somebody else. It's unclear about who selected this. It's unclear why what books are no longer included. The media attention's kind of shifted, so people are kind of not. And it just kind of pisses me off that again, the Academy should remain academically independent, because being well-read helps to make for better warfighters. Well-read, having access to free knowledge. And, I know we talked a little bit about in the interview about protecting kids from certain content, but these are people that are, future naval officers, young men and women, in the most, when they're supposed to be challenging their ideas. And if we, along with all the other bullshit that's been happening at the Naval Academy, if we don't trust them to read certain books, what are we doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here.
So there's that. And then the other, tying to the very beginning of the show, was for my birthday, I got a new Garmin watch. Yeah, have you ever used one of these things?
No.
It's it's a smart watch, and so it tracks your health, and you use it for running and a bunch of other stuff. But I have noticed that if I have a beer, my sleep score for my watch goes into the toilet. And it's one of those oh, okay. So my other is that the thing that I'm keeping an eye on is actually my Garmin tracked health. And so, kind of, so going back to what Michael was talking about is trust the big tech companies. I guess I'm trusting Garmin with it, because they can tell they can tell when I've had a beer or two and I don't sleep very well. And that's it's kind of bananas. So I'm just keeping an eye on that. It's fun too. To be able to track your health that way.
Well, if you discover that drinking before bedtime is bad for your sleep, which I think you just told me, but I'm going to ignore that. If you actually conclude that for real, don't tell me.
Okay. Two data points. Two data points apparently don't make a trend, but they can define a line. So we'll see about that. So, all right. Well, Neil, you want to read us out?
Yeah, for sure. That is it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and for being a part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought-provoking, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling generous, share it on social media or send it to someone who'd appreciate it. Thank you again to Michael O'Hurley for joining us. Hardpoints is produced by Jordan Caruso and brought to you by the Valor Media Network. See you next week.